Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Rogue raided federal agency fires all staff in late night bloodbath. DOGE is laying off everybody in this rogue federal agency. Technically, they're not a federal agency, but they are under the executive branch. It gets complicated, but ain't nobody gonna work there no more. That's what's happening. From The Guardian, most employees at U.S. Institute of Peace mass fired via late night email. And from Breitbart, DOGE executes mass firings at U.S. Institute of Peace. They, quote, failed to deliver peace. Well, that is the job, deliver peace. Did they do it? They did not. And from the Washington Post, DOGE fires nearly all staff at U.S. Institute of Peace headquarters. Employees who worked at the headquarters of the Institute, founded and funded by Congress, received late-night termination notices, though most of the overseas staff were left in place. Mass firings took place at the U.S. Institute of Peace on Friday. Several sources familiar with the matter told CBS News. The employees were terminated effective immediately as part of the Department of Government Efficiency's whole-of-government effort to slash wasteful spending. USIP employees told the Washington Post that between 200 and 300 people had been fired, which is nearly all the Institute's headquarters staff. The firings come after President Donald Trump signed an executive order in February aiming at dismantling the USIP, which is a congressionally funded organization. Congress funds pretty much everything. They structured this entity in a little bit of a sneaky way so that technically it wasn't a direct federal agency. It was a separate legal entity. That was cute, but it didn't save these guys. The USIP has a $55 million budget and a purported mission to promote conflict resolution and prevent conflict across the globe. Quote, taxpayers don't want to spend $50 million per year on a publicly funded research institute that has failed to deliver peace, according to White House Press Deputy Secretary Anna Kelly. Quote, President Trump ended the era of forever wars and established peace in his first term, and he's carrying out his mandate to eliminate bloat and save taxpayer dollars, she said. Fired employees were notified of their termination by email on late Friday night. Quote, Dear employee, this letter is to inform you of a change in your employment status with United States Institute for Peace, according to a copy of the email. Quote, effective March 28, 2025, your employment with us will conclude. The firings come after a federal judge earlier this month declined to grant a temporary restraining order to block DOGE from accessing USIP. USIP had asked the judge to keep DOGE from completing the unlawful dismantling of the Institute. That didn't work out so good. And from The Guardian, most employees at U.S. Institute of Peace mass fired over late-night email. The emails were sent to personal accounts because most staff members had lost access to the organization's system, and they began going out at about 9 p.m. on Friday, according to people familiar with the matter. One former senior official at the Institute said that among those spared were several in human resources and a handful of overseas staffers who had until April 9th to return to the United States. The organization employs about 300 people, or at least it used to. After President Trump's executive order targeting the Institute tried to fight back. There was a standoff as employees blocked DOGE employees from trying to enter their building. DOGE staff were able to get access to the building because of the Washington, D.C. police. Because even after the board of directors was changed, and the new board of directors fired the president of the USIP, he refused to leave the building. He called the police, the Washington, D.C. police, to try to block the DOGE people. The D.C. police instead told him and his friends they need to get out of the building. They don't belong there anymore. So they filed a lawsuit. But even D.C. District Judge Beryl Howell, who chastised DOGE representatives for their behavior, did not reinstate the board members or allow employees to return to the workspace. Because once it's done, it's done. It's a little bit difficult to undo these things, even though D.C. judges have a tendency to try to do that, go back in time, take authority away from the executive branch. But they couldn't do that here. The Trump administration summarily fired the staff of the U.S. Institute of Peace late Friday night, less than 2 weeks after forcibly removing the congressionally funded organization's president and installing in his place an agent of tech billionaire Elon Musk's U.S. DOGE service aimed at cutting the size of government. They're not just cutting the size of government. They're also taking away the establishment's power bases. It is about saving money, but it's also about destroying the cultural power, and in some cases, legal power, financial power, payments to their NGOs that fund their political actions, including riots, including their election promotion, let's just call it, All of those resources are being severely attacked by the Trump administration, and they're doing it really effectively. The establishment has never been in a worse situation because they got themselves targeted because it wasn't enough to play the game, and if you win, you win. They felt they had to win, so they cheated. Now they got caught. And now they have the direct attention of the administration. The administration is not specifically targeting foreign countries. They're targeting this country and cleaning up this country. USIP employees told the Washington Post that between 200 and 300 people, nearly the entirety of the Institute's headquarters staff, had been fired. The employees, who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of retribution from the Trump administration, even though they've already lost their jobs, so I don't know what fear they have of retribution. We don't see any criminal prosecutions of any of these people, regardless of what they were doing with government monies. But they said some employees were offered severance and 1 additional month of health insurance in exchange for their signatures to waive their rights to sue. The Friday night massacre, as the Institute's employees were terming the sweeping terminations, is the latest action in what has become a rapid fire of sudden cuts and hostile takeovers across government and quasi-government agencies over the past 2 months, implemented by Musk and DOGE, short for the Department of Government Efficiency. President Donald Trump has given Musk, the world's richest man, broad authority to slash federal spending and fire tens of thousands of government workers, actions that are now being contested in at least 10 court cases. And there are some wins in the courts, and there are some losses in the courts for both sides. Ultimately, the ability to fire federal employees is going to be reviewed by the Supreme Court. Either the executive branch will be able to do it, or they won't be able to do it. However, I kind of find it impossible to believe that the executive branch is not going to be able to fire employees so they can get on with the work of doing what the executive branch feels it needs to do, as long as it's done through authorized channels. Like whoever's in charge of the agency, if they approve of the hiring, they can be hired as long as there's budget for it. If they approve of the firing, then they can be fired. If employees are fired outside of their contract, they can sue for financial damages. They can't sue to stay inside of the government and do the government's work without the permission and the approval of the federal government. And in the cases that people are being hired back because they were probationary employees and some federal district judge in California decided he didn't like how the Trump administration fired those employees, they could have actions where they could say, listen, we were entitled to get paid more money. Let's settle this financially. They don't really have a legitimate right to get rehired and put back into their old jobs. You're supposed to make work for these people that the government decided they don't really have a use for. You're not going to actually be able to do that long term. Short term, absolutely, they can cause some chaos. All of these liberal activist judges can do that. But long term, no, of course it's not going to stand. The authority for the president to be able to fire the head of any agency has already been established. It was tested, and the president won. It will go back again in front of the Supreme Court. I'm sure he'll win. But the idea that some low-level employee who's on probation is going to be allowed to keep their job regardless of what the president says and the head of the agency that they work at says, that's not going to stand. That has absolutely no chance. They may get a cash settlement, but they're not going to get a chance to keep their job. The Institute has a total staff of about 600 people in offices worldwide. It's actively involved in negotiating peace deals and helping war-torn countries and regions to implement peace settlements and rebuild, including in the Philippines, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Ukraine. Quote, we put mediators in place to help stitch these communities back together, said one employee. So it does have a dramatic effect on violence on the ground immediately by just pulling these assets out. Assets. Are these assets people? Okay, yeah, they are people. Are they intelligence agency assets? Well, let's not ask that question. Maybe a little bit. USIP leaders first sought to convince DOGE representatives that as a registered nonprofit, its personnel and programs were off limits to Musk's elimination campaign. This month, USIP and members of its fired board filed their own lawsuit, naming DOGE and its representatives Trump and members of his cabinet. For the USIP leadership to try to be convincing a federal agency that the federal agency really doesn't belong there, they don't actually have this authority, doesn't really make any sense. It's not like their legal team was talking to DOGE's legal team, or like the USIP's legal team was talking to the White House. That kind of would make some sense. They weren't doing that. They were just like, hey, we run this place and we're trying to tell you DOGE guys, technically you kind of can't be here. Like, that's a legal issue. And that issue has pretty much already been resolved. But there's something very unusual about this that's kind of hidden about the story, and I don't see what the detail is. I don't know what the hidden piece is, but something is really off. Because when management has a problem with management in two separate divisions and they can't resolve it, it goes to legal. It doesn't go from management to individual operator. It's very strange. The lawsuit from USIP claims the executive branch had no authority to dismiss the leadership and staff of the Institute because it was created by the legislative branch, nor could it take over the USIP's privately owned headquarters building. Okay, you can privately own the building with funding provided by Congress, but you really think that's an asset that Congress and the executive branch has no claim on? So who has claim on the asset of the building? You want to move into that building yourself? You want to sell that building and keep the cash? No, it all belongs to the entity. And within the authority of the entity, the assets, the liabilities of the entity, whatever's going on with that entity is controlled by Congress. And Congress has given the authority over that to the executive branch. You're not just some independent guys that could run away with assets from Congress. Although maybe they've already done that with some of the money and the resources. Maybe that's the missing piece here. Filings in the case are scheduled during April, with the hearing near the end of the month. A federal judge has condemned the process through which the administration seized control of USIP, but has declined the petitioner's motion for a temporary restraining order. Some of these issues do get complicated. For example, the funding of this entity, and I think it was structured as a nonprofit, was such that it received grants directly from Congress. So sure, that nonprofit can take that money and buy assets with that and control that money and do kind of whatever they want. But can they convert that for their own personal use? Not really as a nonprofit. There are legal issues, but the more these guys try to push it and try to say, no, we own this building, we own these assets, you can't tell us what to do, the more they set themselves up for potential trouble if the DOJ ever gets interested into looking into what's been going on with these nonprofits. Because the grants were not created so that people who ran the nonprofits could just take the money and do whatever they wanted with it. In the latest action, employees were instructed to sign a 4-page letter ordering them to return all USIP property while agreeing to forego all future claims against the Institute. It ordered them not to disclose any terms of the agreement in exchange for 1 month of health insurance and a monthly stipend paid for an unspecified period. Another article stated they were getting a 1-month severance. It's probably more than 1 month. According to this, it's a monthly stipend, so that's monthly pay for an unspecified period of time. Likely around 6 months, 7 months. Those who refused to sign the letter said will lose all benefits as of Monday. And to make this a little bit more insulting, the termination emails were riddled with mistakes, with employees' names, the month of April, and even the Institute's title misspelled in places, a telling sign of the rushed and haphazard nature of the operation, according to one terminated employee. I would expect a lot of that was just mockery because these kinds of termination emails are not just written by a person in like 2 minutes. They're written by AI usually at this point. And AI knows who they're terminating. They have a database it's being pulled from. They also know the name of the agency that they're terminating people from. By Saturday morning, the terminated headquarters staff were already discussing filing a class action lawsuit and were debating whether to sign their termination documents. Some free advice: they really should sign the documents. They can always try to sue them later anyway. USIP's building was privately owned by the Institute and paid for through the Institute's endowment, two employees said. That was the money they received from Congress. Unlike its overseas programs and staff salaries, which are paid through federal funds and appropriated by Congress. Quote, so to me this seems like the most egregious violation of the law, said one employee. Even though the Institute has its own separate money that it might be raising, I'm sure the bulk of it is coming from Congress, and monies get mixed from Congress and their endowment. If they want to play this game, saying that their building has been stolen, they can play this game. And once they get the DOJ's attention, they're going to have a problem. It's also unclear how and whether the Trump administration planned to pay out USIP's outside contracts, including for work already provided. Quote, obviously, it would be illegal not to pay contractors for services rendered, said the employee, while noting the entire accounting and contracting teams were terminated. It's not illegal like a crime. There would be a claim that you could make, and there's a whole federal court system for disputing whether or not your contract was paid if you feel you weren't paid. Companies and contractors can go ahead and file those claims. Democrats have argued that DOGE lacks the constitutional authority to cancel funding and dissolve agencies and programs authorized by Congress. But the Trump administration has pushed forward in its efforts to aggressively disband or shrink operations, ranging from complete government departments to smaller nonprofits. DOGE also has some excellent attorneys working for it, and they're guided by those attorneys. They have all the authority they need to do anything that it is that they're doing. All those lawsuits where Democrats, establishment people were trying to say, oh, DOGE doesn't have the authority to do this, DOGE needs to have more authority to do that, all those are going to ultimately fail. They're not working without lawyers. And generally, people in business and government, they're sophisticated enough to know this. They don't just run around doing stuff. They run around doing stuff under the authority, advisement, opinions of serious legal advisors. And for now, it's peace out for the Institute of Peace. They're getting shut down.